But yes, my children ruined my career. I mean, I love them and they complete me, but in terms of like, pop stardom, totally ruined it. Yeah.
Welcome to Season 3 of Self-Care-ish, a show about being selfish with care. I'm Megan, your host, and each week we riff on different ways to nourish yourself after a divorce, or if you're on a dating or self-dating journey. Either way, I'm so happy we found each other. Let's get into it. Lily Allen. She's the voice of a generation, or a voice in a generation, specifically millennials like myself, whose formative years, I guess you could call the going out years, were based around MySpace and downloading all the photos from the club that we took on our Canon Pixma cameras and then uploading them all to the internet, complete with all the sweat and unfilteredness. It was truly a glorious time, if you ask me. But speaking of unfilteredness, the most unfiltered pop star at the time was arguably Lily Allen. And after watching clips from her recent interview, I went down a little bit of a Lily Allen Spotify rabbit hole and replayed some of her incredible hits like The Fear and It's Not Fair. Like, we forget, she was iconic and huge. She was the face of Chanel at the time. She's headlining Glastonbury. And then, almost overnight, she was married and pregnant and gone. Now, I've actually read her autobiography, so I feel like I have a little bit of the inside scoop to know that that wasn't entirely the case. The Cliff's Notes version is this. She was overworked, and in a way, she looked to motherhood as a means to tell her label to essentially fuck off and that she needed time off. And she openly says this in her book. Fast forward a year or two on, and realizing that she was actually the main breadwinner in her household, she naturally felt the pressure to go back to work, which, if you've loosely followed her career post-kids, it was marred by a few missteps, affairs, and a divorce. Although, as you know, I am fully an advocate for divorce as a means to get your life back if things aren't working out. But suffice to say, things were rocky because she had to juggle a touring schedule and motherhood and the guilt of being away from her children and the guilt of not making money if she was with her children. This is something I think every single working mother on the planet understands. And that's whether you're a multi-platinum pop star or not. So last week, when she was on the Radio Times podcast and said flat out, "Motherhood ruined my career," I wasn't surprised. I was not surprised that it was Lily Allen saying that. It's Lily Allen. She's literally put the topic of post-sex wet patches in the bedroom into pop music. But what I was surprised at was the shock of the general public that she had admitted this out loud. Because there's still this stigma on women who openly say anything that might be construed as ungrateful or joyous around motherhood. Something that I think is one of the most physically and emotionally draining things you can do in life, especially if you want to do it right. I'd go as far to say that if you are drained and tired after a day of full-on parenting, kudos to you because you are clearly putting effort and you're back into doing a half-decent job. Of course, there are people for whom motherhood is effortless and easy, and those people are insufferable. I'm kidding, sort of. But it would be remiss of me to say that there aren't various degrees of excellence when it comes to parenting, just like there are different levels of the corporate ladder. Some are better than others. We are all trying. What unites us all, though, is this: the unbearable innate knowledge that we, as women or people who give birth, cannot do it all at the same time. And I am going to extend this to single dads too. Like, I've got you in mind. If you happen to be a man who has a baby and you're the main carer, you will see your career torpedo a little bit. But your social kudos, oh my God, through the roof. For the sake of this podcast, I'm just going to stick to women because just genetically we give birth. So the biggest percentage of career maligned people are women in this discussion. Last week, I had an amazing interview with Sarah and Karina, who are the founders of this new dating app called AnyPlans. It's a really interesting chat. I highly recommend you go back and listen to that one. But something Sarah mentioned wriggled its way into my brain, and I have been musing on it ever since. To paraphrase, she said, I'm in my early 30s and I felt that urge to have a child because I thought that was my purpose, or it would bring real purpose into my life. But then I started developing the Any Plans app, and I'm so passionate about it. And I have since realized that maybe the urge to have a child was more of an urge for purpose than an urge for motherhood. Which does kind of explain why people, when they have a project that they're working on, jokingly call it their baby. Because you have to nurture it. You put your blood, sweat, and tears into it. You think about it at night. You worry about it. You get an amazing sense of satisfaction when things go well. Like, that makes sense to me. And then it really opened up a can of worms in my head because I started looking around the room when I was out recently at lots of people with kids. And I couldn't help but wonder. I was wondering how many people in the room were just in stagnant relationships and they didn't know what to do next, so they had kids. Which isn't a bad thing per se. Kids are great, exhausting, but great. But I guess the perception of every mother is that we all have kids because we feel this innate urge deep within our wombs to create life. But maybe the decision is way more nuanced than that. And when I think back to my own motherhood journey, I did feel that urge when I was in my marriage. When we were trying, I remember feeling really disappointed every month when it didn't happen, and I cried a lot when I miscarried a couple of times. And of course, I felt incredible joy when I found out I was pregnant. But I also remember that we got married and we just thought, next step, kids. Like, that was just the logical next thing to do, and that's what we were expected to do, so we did it. And every time it didn't work, there was a part of my brain that went, I'm failing society in some way. I'm not ticking the box that's meant to be ticked. Societal conditioning at its finest. Because, as I've mentioned extensively on this podcast, we love capitalism, but it does need to have bodies to survive. So society does have a vested interest in influencing women to give birth. And I have rabbit holes to go down on this issue, so I'll just take a beat and I'll get right back into it in a sec. No ads, just a reminder that if you haven't already, please join the Self-Care Society Substack. It's like the newsletter. Each month, you will get in your inbox a list of incredible self-care ideas and things to do to help you fill your cup. And all you have to do is subscribe at substack.com/@selfcareish. But all the links are in the show notes, so don't worry. So going back to what Sarah from Any Plans was saying, essentially, she created her own baby. A business baby. And I was actually having a drink with Sarah and Karina last night, and I was telling them that I was going to mention them in this week's pod. And Karina, her business partner, very wisely piped up and said, essentially, it's all well and good to say, hey, women, maybe you should start a business instead of having kids. Maybe that would fulfill you. But the fact is, even if you do that, and you do get the enrichment out of it, you will still have that little voice of society whispering in your ear that maybe you're missing out. Maybe you should have had a child, which is true. And that part wasn't the groundbreaking thing that she said for me. But she then went on to say, but the reason men have enjoyed a sense of purpose for hundreds of years is that in a heterosexual partnership, by default, they just get to enjoy both the joy of purpose in their career and parenthood, because physiologically, women have to take time out to give birth and heal, and men don't. And my eyes popped. Men have been able to have it all for so long. And I know if you're a guy listening to this, you're rolling your eyes, but it's just a fact, okay? But I'm not against you. I'm just stating a fact. Which, of course, now leads us down the rabbit hole of men in modern society and the much publicized news that they are struggling with a lack of purpose. And Professor Scott Galloway spoke about this recently on Diary of a CEO, and I'll link to that chat in the show notes. There was a lot of data he mentioned in that episode about dating apps and why men feel a lack of purpose. In summary, he said, women are more educated and make more money these days than they ever have before. And women naturally want to date someone on the same level or above them, whereas men commonly are happy to date a woman who earns less than them. And now there's nuance in this, but this is just to spell it out simply. So there's this disconnect, and what's happening is there's a whole subset of dangerous men being cultivated. Dangerous in the sense that they are lacking purpose and human connection, and it's driving them into misogynistic online forums and communities, and to an extreme level, some of these men become so enraged and feel so isolated by society that they lash out and become things like mass shooters. This is a real issue. There are no female mass shooters. It's a whole thing and a whole other topic. Such is the power of women, I guess. I'm kidding. But it's more such is the power of community. But I'm not going to solve that problem in this pod, so yeah, we'll discuss that in another app. But back to the topic. Oh yeah, life is unfair to women, especially when it comes to kids and career. And I'm sure there are moments when Lily Allen, in her darkest, most stretched thin moments, trying to maintain a relationship with her ex-husband and love her daughters and be a world-class pop star, that she has probably thought, maybe I should have thought this whole kids thing through. And I think she does actually talk about this in her book. And I'll join her in that. I am a very open advocate for people to parent like you're divorced if you're in a cis-het relationship. And I have a whole episode about it, but it's essentially taking turns each week to manage the household labor and work and parent, just like what divorced parents do week on, week off. Because I just don't know otherwise how the average person on an average, salary can manage to enjoy a sense of self, give their all to their career, and give enough energy to their kids without tag teaming the load equally with their partner. And I would be lying if I didn't admit that I largely got divorced because I was fed up with feeling like I had to carry everything on my own. And my ex-husband is and was quite involved, and we still had issues with that stuff. Like I remember, and this is not to disparage him, we've talked about this at length together, but at one stage, I was working full-time and sending our son to daycare, and during COVID, like many, my ex wasn't working. He was actively looking for work. And one day recently I said to him, "Isn't it weird that we didn't take our son out of daycare while you weren't working, and we could have I would have worked and you did the parenting?" And he said, "Honestly, it just never occurred to me." And I'll be honest, it never occurred to me either. And that's on societal conditioning. But what do you guys think about Lily Allen's comments about motherhood? Can you have it all? Am I just a terrible mother for admitting the struggle with her? You can slide into my DMs on Instagram, or even better, if you love the show, I would love and appreciate a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Every review you do helps anyone who's getting divorced or separated find the show and, gets the word out there. I hope you have an amazing week, and I will see you next week.